Under the frost-kissed moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her silver dagger like a lover's tear, promising both death and forgotten mercy. Ilara moved through the whispering pines like a shadow woven from night itself, her boots silent on the virgin snow that blanketed the northern wilds. The wind howled in mournful chorus, carrying the distant UIV of wolves that echoed the ache in her chest, a sound too raw, too alive for one such as her. She was no longer of the pack, no longer the Omega whose gentle touch had once soothed the fevered brows of her kin. Rejection had carved her deeper than any claw, cast out by her alpha for a whispered betrayal she never committed, left to the mercy of the encroaching frost and the fangs of the undead who prowled the borders. Vampirism had claimed her then, a curse born of desperation in the shadowed eaves of the elder woods. The vampires, those eternal wanderers of blood and moonlight, had seen potential in her shattered spirit, a weapon honed by loss, unburdened by the ties of the living. They had turned her, their venom a fire that burned away the warmth of her Omega nature, leaving only the cold precision of the hunter. Now, she served the Crimson Court, their assassin veiled in midnight silk, her skin pale as the snowdrifts, and her eyes glowing with the feral red of stolen life. But beneath the hunger, the rejection lingered like a thorn in her heart, a wound that no feeding could sate. The mission was clear, etched into her mind by the court's high priestess under the blood moon's gaze. Infiltrate the frost-bound castle of King Thorn, the Alpha whose reign had spilled rivers of blood across the realms. He was marked by guilt, they said, a king who had slain his own brother in a bid for the throne, only to inherit a crown heavy with curses. Whispers spoke of his melancholy, how he wandered the battlements alone, haunted by the ghosts of those he could not save. The vampires sought his end to tip the scales of the endless war between the living packs and the nocturnal covens. Ilara's hand tightened around the hilt of her dagger, its blade etched with runes that drank light. The single drop of her own blood, preserved from her turning, still gleaming at its pommel like a talisman of what she had lost. The air grew thicker as she crested the ridge, the castle looming ahead like a beast carved from ice and iron. Its spires pierced the starless sky, torches flickering along the walls in defiant pools of orange against the encroaching white. Snowflakes danced on the wind, stinging her cheeks like accusations, and she paused, inhaling the sharp scent of pine resin mingled with the metallic tang of distant forges. Her body, undead yet thrumming with the remnants of her wolfish instincts, rebelled against the chill. It seeped into her bones, a reminder of the life she had been denied. What was strength, if not enduring the freeze of exile? She had asked herself that question in the endless nights since her banishment, when the pack's howls had faded into silence, leaving her adrift in a world that viewed her as monster. Slipping past the outer patrols, mere shadows to her heightened senses, Ilara scaled the sheer wall with the grace of a specter, her fingers finding purchase in the frozen mortar. The guards' breaths puffed like smoke signals in the cold, their armored forms clinking softly as they paced. She dropped into the courtyard, landing without a sound, the snow muffling her descent. The central keep rose before her, its great doors barred by ancient oak and iron bands forged in the fires of forgotten wars. But it was the inner sanctum she sought, where the king retreated from his court's intrigues, his guilt a shroud thicker than any cloak. As she melted into the corridors, torchlight cast elongated shadows that twisted like tormented souls. The castle reeked of aged stone and smoldering hearths, the faint undercurrent of wolf musk clinging to the air, a scent that twisted her gut with unwelcome longing. She had been one of them once, an Omega destined for quiet devotion, her empathy a gift that bound the pack in times of strife. Now it was her curse, sharpening her perception to the pulse of life around her, the steady thrum of servants in distant halls, the erratic hearts of scheming betas plotting in alcoves, and deeper still, a rhythm that called to her like the moon's pull, a strong, weary beat echoing from the king's chambers. Ilara pressed against the cold wall, her breath unnecessary but ragged in simulation of fear she dared not name. The dagger felt heavier now, its blood-drop pommel warm against her palm, as if alive with the pulse of her forsaken humanity. She had killed before, rivals of the court, encroaching hunters. But this mark was different. Thorn was no mere tyrant. Legends painted him as a redeemer, fallen, his ethical core eroded by the weight of duty and betrayal. The vampires cared not for his soul, only his death. Yet as she edged toward the chamber door, a sliver of moonlight pierced a high window, bathing the floor in silver, and for a moment she saw her reflection. Eyes hollow, lips stained with the phantom taste of blood, a woman unmade. The door creaked under her touch, unguarded in the king's solitary vigil. She slipped inside, the room enveloping her in shadows, broken only by the dying embers of a fire. There he stood, back to her, silhouetted against the frost-laced window, his broad shoulders bowed under a fur-lined mantle. The air hummed with his presence, power raw and unyielding, laced with the scent of pine smoke and ancient sorrow. Thorn turned slowly, his eyes catching the moonlight, golden and piercing, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the silence. In that gaze, Ilara felt the first crack in her armored heart, a warmth she had long forgotten, stirring like embers beneath ash. But the dagger was already rising, her mission a chain she could not break. The wind outside howled louder, as if the moon itself wept for the collision to come. The king's gaze held her like chains forged in the heart of winter, golden eyes flickering with the dying light of the embers, pulling at something deep within Ilara's undead core. She froze, dagger poised mid-air, its blood-drop pommel catching the moonlight in a crimson gleam that mocked her hesitation. The room seemed to contract around them, the air thick with the scent of smoldering wood and the faint metallic edge of his own restrained fury. Outside, the wind clawed at the stone walls, a relentless dirge that mirrored the storm brewing in her veins. Thorn did not flinch, did not summon the guards whose distant footfalls echoed like fading heartbeats. Instead, he straightened, his mantle slipping slightly to reveal the broad expanse of his chest, scarred from battles long etched into legend. The Alpha King, cursed by fratricide and the whispers of a throne built on bones, stood not as a tyrant, but as a man hollowed by regret. His face, chiseled by years of command and loss, softened in the silver glow. Lines of weariness carving paths where once there had been unyielding resolve. "You are not of my court," he said, voice low and resonant, like the rumble of thunder over snow-laden peaks. It was not a question, but an acknowledgement, laced with a curiosity that pierced her defenses. Ilara's hand trembled, the dagger's weight a betrayal of her purpose. She had come for his blood, to spill it across the frost-kissed floors and claim the court's favor. Yet his presence stirred the embers of her Omega soul, the one she had buried beneath layers of venom and vengeance. Instinct warred within her, the vampire's hunger urging the strike, the wolf's ancient pull drawing her toward the warmth radiating from him, a heat that seeped through her cold flesh like sunlight on eternal night. Fear coiled in her gut, not of his strength, for she was shadow and fang, but of the recognition in his eyes, as if he saw beyond the assassin's veil to the rejected woman beneath. She lunged, blade slicing the air with a whisper, aiming for the vulnerable hollow of his throat. But Thorn moved with the fluid grace of his kind, sidestepping into the moonlight, his hand catching her wrist in a grip that was iron yet strangely gentle. The contact ignited her, a jolt of life force, raw and electric, flooding her senses with the scent of pine forests and fresh earth, mingled with the deeper notes of sorrow and unyielding duty. His touch burned, not with pain, but with a forbidden awakening, stirring the dormant bond that Omegas once wove through touch alone. She gasped, a sound alien to her throat as visions flickered unbidden. flashes of his guilt-ridden nights, the brother's blood on his hands under a harvest moon, the endless war that had scarred his reign. "Release me," she hissed, twisting free with vampiric speed, her red eyes narrowing to slits. But the dagger slipped from her grasp, clattering to the stone floor where the blood-drop pommel pulsed like a living heart, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters. Thorn's expression shifted from wariness to something perilously close to pity, his golden gaze tracing the pale lines of her face, the faint veins of blue beneath her skin that betrayed her undead state. "Vampire," he murmured, the word heavy with the weight of old enmities, "sent by the crimson shadows to end what they cannot conquer. But you hesitate. Why?" The question hung between them, sharper than any blade. Ilara backed toward the window, the cold glass pressing against her spine like an old lover's indifference. Curiosity bloomed in her chest, unbidden and treacherous. Why did he not roar for his guards? Why did his voice carry no venom, only the quiet melancholy of one who had long danced with death? She had expected rage, a beast unchained. Instead, he was a king adrift, his ethical heart a beacon in the gloom, drawing her despite the fear that clawed at her resolve. The connection was instinctive, a thread of fate pulling taut, born from the shared fracture of their souls. Her exile into monstrosity, his throne of guilt. Yet she denied it, rationalizing the pull as mere illusion, the remnants of her wolfish instincts mocking her new existence. Wind howled through the cracks in the stone, carrying the distant weavos of his pack on the borders, a chorus that tugged at her forgotten loyalties. Thorn stepped closer, not in threat, but in quiet pursuit, his breath visible in the chill air, a mortal rhythm that mocked her stillness. "I know you're kind," he said, voice softening like melting snow. "Eternal hunters, driven by blood and betrayal. But there is light in you still, flickering like these embers. What wound sends you to my door, assassin?" Ilara's mind reeled. The empathy she had once wielded as an omega surging back, unearthing the pain of her rejection, the alpha's cold dismissal, the pack's turning backs, the venomous embrace that had saved her only to remake her into this. His touch lingered in her senses, a warmth that thawed the ice around her heart, awakening a love she dared not name, raw, resisted, a redemption she had never sought. Fear warred with the curiosity that now burned brighter, urging her to flee or to linger, to strike or to listen. The dagger lay between them, its blood symbol a silent witness to the choice unfolding. In that suspended moment, as moonlight bathed their forms in ethereal silver, Ilara felt the first true crack in her armored isolation. The king before her was no mere mark. He was a mirror to her own brokenness, his guilt an echo of her shame. But the mission's chains held fast, and with a snarl born of denial, she lunged again, not for the kill, but to escape the pull that threatened to unravel her entirely. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Ilara's snarl tore through the chamber like a rift in the frozen night, her body a blur of shadow and fury as she vaulted toward the window. The glass shattered under her impact, shards exploding outward into the howling gale, catching the moonlight in fleeting prisms that rained like shattered stars. She tumbled into the void, the wind whipping her midnight cloak as she plummeted toward the snow-swept courtyard below. Cold air clawed at her skin, a savage embrace that grounded her in the undead reality she had chosen, or been forced into. Yet Thorn's touch lingered, a phantom heat searing her wrist, unraveling the threads of her resolve. She landed in a crouch, snow erupting around her like a silenced explosion, the impact jarring through limbs that no longer truly felt pain. But the warmth persisted, insidious and unwelcome, stirring visions of packfires and gentle caresses long denied. Behind her, the castle stirred, shouts rising from the depths, the clamor of armored boots on stone. Thorn had not called for guards in the chamber, but her escape would summon them now, a hornet's nest disturbed by her failed strike. She sprinted toward the tree line, the pines looming like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with frost that glittered under the moon's unyielding gaze. The blood-drop pommel of her dagger, left behind in the scuffle, haunted her thoughts, a symbol of her lost humanity, now abandoned in the enemy's lair. It pulsed in her mind's eye, crimson and alive, as if mocking her flight. What madness had seized her? She was the court's blade, forged in venom and exile, not some lovesick Omega clinging to forgotten instincts. Yet the king's golden eyes haunted her, their melancholy depth echoing her own rejection, the pack's betrayal, the Alpha's cold decree that had driven her into the vampire's arms. His guilt was a mirror to her shame, and that recognition terrified her more than any blade. A low growl rumbled from the shadows ahead, freezing her mid-stride. Not wolves, something fouler, the acrid stench of decay and stolen blood marking her pursuers. Crimson Court enforcers, dispatched to ensure the mission's success, their forms emerging from the underbrush like wraiths born of nightmare. 3 of them, eyes glowing with the same feral red as hers, fangs bared in silent accusation. They had tracked her through the wilds, the court's paranoia a leash tighter than any chain. Traitor, the lead one hissed, his voice a rasp of wind over graves. The priestess foresaw your weakness. The king's blood is ours, or yours will spill first. Ilara's hand flew to the empty sheath at her belt, cursing the lost dagger. Fear coiled, not for her immortality, but for the vulnerability his touch had exposed, a crack in her armor that these brethren would exploit. She dodged the first lunge, her nails extending into claws that raked the air, drawing a spray of dark ichor from the attacker's throat. The fight erupted in a whirlwind of motion. Snow churned to bloody slush under their feet, the wind carrying guttural snarls and the wet rip of flesh. She was faster, her Omega agility fused with vampiric precision, but they were relentless, driven by the court's unyielding creed. One pinned her against a pine trunk, its bark biting into her back like thorns, while another's fangs grazed her shoulder, venom burning like liquid fire. In that moment of desperation, a roar shattered the fray. Thorn, bursting from the tree line like a storm unleashed, his massive frame a blur of fur and fury. He had followed her, his alpha senses attuned to the chaos, golden eyes blazing with a protectiveness that stunned her. No king should risk his throne for an assassin's whim, yet here he was, claws extended, slamming into her assailants with the force of winter's wrath. One vampire crumpled under his blow, bones cracking like ice on a frozen river. The other turned, only to meet Thorn's jaws in a savage tear that spilled black blood across the snow. Ilara staggered free, her breath ragged, watching as the king dispatched the last with a mercy kill, swift, almost regretful, his form shifting back to man under the moon's pale witness. Blood streaked his mantle, mingling with the white drifts, and he turned to her, chest heaving, the scent of his exertion, earth and pine and raw power, washing over her like a balm. "You lead them to my gates," he said, voice roughened by the fight, yet laced with no accusation, only weary understanding. "But I will not let shadows claim what fate has brought." She backed away, heart, a thing long stilled, pounding in phantom rhythm. Why had he come? The bond stirred again, deeper now, empathy flooding her senses, flashes of his isolation, the throne's weight crushing his ethical soul, the brother's ghost whispering accusations in empty halls. Her own pain mirrored it, the rejection that had hollowed her, turning gentleness to lethality. In his defense of her, unbidden and fierce, she saw not conquest, but shared fracture. 2 exiles bound by wounds the world had inflicted. Curiosity warred with denial. She rationalized it as survival's ploy, yet the warmth in his gaze thawed something eternal within her, awakening a tenderness born of mutual pain. The wind howled softer now, as if the moon approved, silver light pooling around them like spilled mercury. Thorn extended a hand, scarred and steady, not to capture, but to offer refuge. "The court will send more. My pack's borders are yours for this night, if you choose." His words hung heavy, a choice veiled in melancholy duty, his guilt etching lines deeper into his face. Alara hesitated, the forest silence amplifying the dilemma. Flee to her monstrous kin, or step into the unknown warmth of one who saw her not as killer, but as kin lost. The snow settled around their feet, burying the blood in pristine white, a canvas for rebirth or ruin. In that fragile truce, as distant Uiv echoed like a prayer, Alara felt the first threads of a bond weave tight, not love, not yet, but the promise of redemption in the shelter of his shadow. Yet the court's call lingered in her veins, a venomous whisper urging betrayal, and she wondered, what was mercy, if not risking the heart for one who dared to see your light? Thorn led her deeper into the pines, toward a hidden cave mouth veiled by icicles, its entrance flickering with the warm glow of an inner fire he had prepared in haste. The air grew thicker with the scent of burning pine, a sanctuary carved from the wilds where his scouts patrolled unseen. Alara followed, steps silent on the crunching snow, her body thrumming with the aftershocks of battle and that insidious awakening. Inside, the cave walls gleamed with veins of quartz, reflecting the flames like captured stars, and Thorn shrugged off his bloodied mantle, revealing the ancient scars that mapped his torso, reminders of wars and losses that paralleled her own hidden marks. He kindled the fire higher, sparks dancing upward like freed spirits, and offered her a water skin, its contents warmed by his touch. "Drink," he murmured, golden eyes meeting hers across the blaze. "It is not blood, but it sustains the weary." The gesture undid her further, empathy surging as she glimpsed his inner turmoil. The fratricide stain, a crown that choked his compassion, yet drove him to this act of unlikely grace. She accepted, the liquid's warmth spreading through her cold form, stirring memories of pack hearths and shared warmth she had forsaken. They sat in silence at first, the fire's crackle the only sound, weaving a fragile barrier against the outer storm. Thorn spoke then, voice low and cadenced, recounting fragments of his guilt, the brother's betrayal in battle, the throne's demand for blood that had shattered his soul. Alara listened, her red eyes softening in the firelight, and found herself whispering of her exile, the false accusation, the pack's rejection, the vampire's cold salvation turned curse. Words flowed like melting snow, empathy blooming into a tentative bond, each revelation stripping away layers of isolation. Yet, as the night deepened, the wind carried new howls, not wolves, but the court's relentless pursuit, shadows stirring beyond the cave's veil. Thorn rose, hand on his sword, his presence a shield she had never known. In that moment, resisted affection flickered to life, raw and redemptive, binding them against the encroaching dark. But doubt lingered. Could a vampire's heart truly heal a king's wound, or would it only draw more blood? The fire's glow etched shadows across the cave walls, turning quartz veins into rivers of liquid silver that mirrored the turmoil in Alara's chest. She sat huddled in the fur pelt Thorn had draped over her shoulders, its warmth a foreign intrusion against her chilled skin, seeping into the marrow of her undead form like an insistent whisper. The king's words hung in the air between them, heavy as the frost-laden pines outside. His confession of fratricide, a raw wound laid bare under the fire's merciless light. She had shared her own scars in return, the pack's rejection like a blade to the gut, the venom's burn that had twisted her empathy into a predator's cunning. Yet as the flames crackled, devouring logs with hungry snaps, something deeper stirred within her, unbidden and ancient, rising from the ashes of her Omega soul. Thorn watched her across the blaze, his golden eyes reflecting the dance of embers, lines of exhaustion, and quiet resolve etching his face. He was no longer the distant monarch of legends, but a man forged in the crucible of duty and loss, his broad frame silhouetted against the cave's mouth where the wind moaned like a grieving spirit. The scent of pine smoke clung to him, mingling with the faint, earthy musk of his alpha essence, a pull that tugged at her core, resisted yet undeniable. "Your eyes," he said softly, voice rumbling like distant thunder over snowfields. "They burn not with hunger alone, but with a light I've seen in dreams. The moon's gift, perhaps, hidden even from you." Alara shifted, the fur brushing her arms like a lover's hesitant touch, and felt it then, a tremor deep in her veins, not the cold venom of her turning, but a warmer current, pulsing in rhythm with the fire's heartbeat. Her hidden gift, the Pathfinder's sight that Omegas of old wielded to guide lost souls through shadowed paths, had slumbered since her exile, buried under layers of blood and betrayal. But Thorn's proximity, his ethical melancholy a beacon in her night, coaxed it awake. Visions flickered at the edges of her perception, threads of fate weaving through the ether, silver strands connecting wounds to healings, rejections to redemptions. She gasped, clutching her temples as the cave blurred, the quartz walls dissolving into a tapestry of moonlight and memory. In that haze, she saw him, not as the assassin's mark, but as the fractured king whose destiny intertwined with hers. Flashes assaulted her, the brother's blood staining snow under a harvest moon, the throne's curse binding his spirit in chains of guilt, an encroaching war where vampire covens and wolf packs clashed in eternal crimson. And woven through it all, her own form, pale and fierce, standing as the key, her touch unraveling the curse, her empathy bridging the chasm between monster and man. The blood-drop pommel, lost in the chamber, appeared in the vision too, its crimson gleam a symbol of spilled life reborn, pulsing as if calling her back to claim it, to seal their bond. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice fracturing like ice under pressure, red eyes wide as the revelation crashed over her. The gift manifested fully now, a surge of spiritual clarity that flooded her senses. The wind outside carried not just howls, but warnings of the court's advancing shadows, their fangs honed for betrayal. She could feel the paths diverging, flee to the vampire's cold embrace, or stay and ignite the king's redemption. Her love the flame that would test them both. Pain lanced through her, the weight of it visceral, as if the moon herself pressed a hand to her heart, demanding choice amid the suffering. Thorn knelt before her, his scarred hand reaching out, hovering just short of contact, respect in the restraint. The air between them hummed with unspoken power, the fire's heat paling against the warmth of his nearness. "The Deuce's mark," he breathed, awe threading his tone, golden gaze locking onto hers with piercing intensity. "You are the Pathfinder, Alara, the one foretold in the lunar scrolls, born to heal the Alpha's deepest wound. I felt it in your touch, that first electric pull. My guilt. It blinds me, chains me to this endless war. But you see the threads, don't you? You are my destiny's unraveling." She recoiled, the vision's clarity a double-edged blade, slicing through her denials. Love was no reward, but a trial, resisted, rationalized, now crashing upon her like a winter avalanche. Her Omega instincts, long suppressed, bloomed in tandem with the gift, empathy flooding her with his essence, the melancholy duty that had hollowed him, the ethical core that drove him to protect even an enemy. Yet fear clawed at her throat. She was vampire now, a creature of blood and night, her touch awakening not just affection, but the peril of her court's wrath. The cave seemed to close in, quartz gleaming like judgmental eyes, the fire's shadows twisting into symbols of their shared fracture, snow-white purity stained with red. Outside, the wind rose to a wail, carrying the acrid tang of approaching foes, the court's enforcers closing the net. Thorn's hand closed gently around hers, the contact igniting the gift further, a shared vision now, their minds linking in a visceral rush. He saw her past, the rejection's sting, the turning's fire, and gasped, his free hand pressing to his chest as if to staunch a mortal wound. You were cast out, remade in shadow, yet your light endures, the curse on my bloodline. It demands a healer's bond, one forged in mercy over vengeance. You are that key, Alara. Without you, my reign crumbles to dust and bone. Tears, impossible for her kind, pricked her eyes, hot and traitorous. As the revelation settled like fresh snow, her love, awakened by his touch, was the proof of her renacimiento, a redemption that transcended her monstrosity. But the dilemma loomed, moral and raw. What was strength if not choosing compassion over the bloodlust that had defined her? The fire popped, sending sparks skyward, and in that instant, as distant Weavos joined the gale, Alara felt the moon's approval, a spiritual hush amid the storm. Thorn's grip tightened, not in possession, but in shared vulnerability, his guilt's weight lifting fractionally in her presence. Yet the shadows stirred beyond the cave, fangs glinting in the moonlight, and Alara knew the revelation was no end, but a forge for the trials ahead. Her gift had awakened, binding them in destiny's silken web, but would it heal or merely illuminate the blood to come? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The shadows beyond the cave's mouth coalesced into form, a writhing mass of crimson eyes and bared fangs that slithered through the icicle-veiled entrance like venom seeping from a wound. Alara's gift surged within her, the Pathfinder's sight sharpening the night into crystalline paths, silver threads of fate twisting toward confrontation, red veins of bloodlust pulsing from the approaching horde. Thorn rose beside her, his body a wall of coiled power, golden eyes narrowing as the fire's glow caught the first glint of steel. Vampire blades drawn for the kill. The air thickened with the stench of decay and frost-bitten earth, the wind's wail rising to a crescendo that drowned the distant howls of his pack, as if the moon itself held its breath for the judgment to unfold. She pulled her hand from his, the warmth of his touch lingering like a brand on her skin, a reminder of the bond that now chained her more surely than any court's decree. The revelation had stripped her bare, exposing the Omega light beneath her vampiric shell, but light demanded trial, love as proof, not prize. Her past crashed upon her like an avalanche, the pack's betrayal, the false whispers of treason that had driven her into exile. The Alpha's cold gaze as he turned her out to die under a merciless moon. And now, the Crimson Court. Her monstrous saviors turned jailers, converged to reclaim their wayward blade. Freedom or love? The choice loomed, visceral and tearing, her gift illuminating the moral precipice, forgive the wounds that had forged her or wage war in vengeance's name. The lead enforcer emerged first, a towering figure cloaked in tattered black, his face a mask of scarred pallor, eyes burning with the priestess's fanatic zeal. "Alara the Turned," he rasped, voice like gravel under iron boots, fangs elongating as he scanned the cave's depths. "You falter before the prey. The king's blood will anoint our victory, or yours will sate the shadows." Behind him, a dozen more spilled forth, their forms a tide of midnight silk and gleaming claws. The court's elite honed for this very purge. But woven among them, Alara's sight pierced deeper. A familiar silhouette at the rear, cloaked in wolf-gray fur that reeked of pack betrayal. Kyle, her former alpha, the one whose rejection had shattered her world, now allied with the vampires in a treacherous pact. His eyes, once stormy blue, now gleamed with rival ambition. a scar across his throat, a mocking echo of the lies he had spun to claim power in her absence. Thorn's growl rumbled low, a seismic warning that vibrated through the quartz walls, his hand instinctively shielding her as he stepped forward. "You tread on sacred ground," he declared, voice steady, yet laced with the melancholy of a king who had spilled too much kin blood already. Guilt etched his features, the fratricide's shadow lengthening in the firelight, but his ethical core burned fierce. Protect the broken, even if it meant facing the ghosts of his past. Ilara's heart, stilled yet aching, twisted at the sight. His defense was no conquest, but a mirror to her own buried compassion, awakening the love she had rationalized as mere survival's illusion. The enforcers lunged, a storm of fangs and fury erupting into the cave, snow from their boots melting into slick pools that reflected the chaos in fractured silver. Ilara moved with them, her body a whirlwind of shadow, claws raking through the nearest assailant in a spray of dark ichor that splattered the walls like accusations. The fight was visceral, sensory overload. The wet rip of flesh, the coppery tang of spilled blood mingling with pine smoke, the cold bite of wind slicing through the melee as bodies tumbled into the drifts outside. Thorn fought at her side, his massive form a bulwark, claws extended in brutal arcs that felled two vampires with merciful precision, snaps of neckbone echoing like thunderclaps, his strikes born not of rage but regretful necessity. Kale circled the fray, his presence a poison in her veins, waiting for the moment to strike. Her gift flared, visions assailing her amid the blood-slick snow, threads of his treachery, how he had bartered her exile to the court for vampiric alliances, dreaming of a throne built on hybrid might. He was the traitor incarnate, the rival alpha whose ambition had poisoned her pack, driving her into this half-life. Pain lanced through her as she parried his advance, their bodies colliding in a clash that sent her sprawling against the cave wall, quartz shards drawing thin lines of her own blood, crimson drops that evoked the lost dagger's pommel, a symbol now reclaimed in memory, pulsing with the promise of renascimento. "Why linger with the fallen king?" Kyle snarled, his breath hot against her face, blue eyes alight with possessive fury. "You were mine to break, Ilara. Omega light twisted to my will. Join me, and we'll topple his cursed line, forge a realm where rejection bows to power." His words were a dagger to her soul, dredging the shame of her banishment, the nights of howling isolation under indifferent stars. Freedom tempted her, escape the bond's pull, reclaim her lethal independence in the court's cold embrace. Yet Thorn's roar drew her gaze. He dispatched another enforcer, blood streaking his furred arms, his golden eyes finding hers across the carnage, a silent plea woven with melancholy duty. Choose mercy, not the war that would consume them both. The moral dilemma crested like a wave, crashing through her core. Love or liberty, forgiveness for the past's cruelties, or vengeance that would drown her light forever? Her gift illuminated the paths. War with Kale would free her from Thorn's awakening tenderness, but chain her to eternal shadow. Forgiveness might bind her to the king's redemption, proving strength in compassion's fragile flame. With a cry born of fractured spirit, Ilara surged forward, her claws finding Kale's throat not to kill, but to pin him against the frozen earth. "No more blood for your games," she whispered, voice trembling with the weight of choice, empathy flooding her as she glimpsed his own wounds, ambition's hollow victory, a heart rotted by isolation. The pack's howls swelled in the distance, Thorn's loyal betas emerging from the tree line, turning the tide as vampires fell back into the night. Kale writhed, hatred twisting his features, but she held, the moon's silver light bathing them in judgment's glow. Thorn approached, his presence a steady anchor, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a touch that sealed the choice, awakening love not as reward, but as the trial's fire. Yet as the last enforcer fled into the storm, doubt lingered in her chest, sharp as the wind's bite. Had mercy crowned her, or merely delayed the war's inevitable blood. The snow drank the fallen's essence, pristine white over red, a canvas of fragile peace amid the ethical storm. And Ilara wondered if forgiveness could truly heal when the past's ghosts still whispered of war. The snow-laden silence that followed the fray wrapped the cave's mouth like a shroud, broken only by the ragged breaths of the fallen and the faint, retreating snarls of the court's remnants vanishing into the gale. Ilara's claws dug into Kael's throat, holding him pinned against the blood-soaked earth, his body limp yet thrumming with unquenched ambition, blue eyes flickering with the dying embers of his betrayal. The moon hung low, a silver sentinel casting its ethereal glow over the carnage, illuminating the crimson rivulets that snaked through the drifts, echoes of the blood-drop pommel she had lost, now reclaimed in this visceral tableau of choice and consequence. Her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, pulsed within her like a second heartbeat, weaving silver threads through the night, paths of war dissolving into fragile veins of peace, her mercy the loom that bound them. Thorn stood at her side, his scarred hand warm on her shoulder, a steady anchor amid the storm's dying whispers. His touch, once the spark that awakened her dormant love, now sealed it. A flame kindled in pain, resisted through nights of denial, rationalized as mere survival's illusion, and finally accepted as the redemption she had never dared to claim. Yet acceptance came not as triumph, but as sacrifice. The court's venom in her veins would forever mark her an outcast, her omega light a beacon that invited endless pursuit. She released Kael with a shuddering breath, her claws retracting as she rose, leaving him broken but alive in the snow. A moral mercy that mirrored Thorn's own haunted ethic, choosing compassion over the vengeance that had forged his guilt. Kael coughed, dark blood flecking his lips, his gaze shifting from hatred to a hollow recognition of his defeat. "You choose the fallen king," he rasped, voice fraying like wind-torn silk, "over the power we could have wielded, foolish light in a world of shadows." But even as he spoke, the pack's betas encircled him, their golden eyes wary yet obedient to Thorn's silent command. No kill, only binding. The former alpha's treachery would face the pack's judgment under the next moon, a trial of forgiveness or exile that echoed Ilara's own rebirth from rejection's ashes. She turned away, the wind tugging at her cloak like insistent fingers, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the crisp bite of pine, sensations that grounded her in this pivotal renascimento. Thorn drew her into the cave's deeper warmth, the fire's embers reigniting under his careful tending, flames leaping to life with a soft roar that banished the outer chill. The quartz walls gleamed, reflecting their forms in fractured silver. Two fractured souls, vampire and alpha, bound by destiny's unyielding weave. He knelt before her once more, not in supplication, but in shared vulnerability, his golden eyes holding hers with the melancholy depth of a king who had long carried his wounds alone. "The curse lifts," he murmured, voice resonant as the earth's hidden rivers, "not by blade or blood, but by this, your choice, your light. The fratricide's shadow fades in your presence, Ilara. You are my healing, the pathfinder who guides me from guilt's abyss." She reached for him then, her pale hand tracing the ancient scar across his chest, the contact igniting a cascade of visions, their union under lunar temples, pacts and covens forging uneasy peace through her gift's revelation, a realm where rejection birthed alliance rather than war. The love that his touch had awakened bloomed fully now, tender and tragic, born in the crucible of suffering, a redemption that demanded her surrender to the wolfish instincts she had buried, her vampiric hunger tempered by his ethical fire. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual thorn. Was this freedom, or merely destiny's gilded chain? The moon's light filtered through the icicles, dappling their skin in prismatic patterns, and she felt the deuce's whisper in the wind, a call to faith over despair, compassion's quiet power eclipsing the throne's iron might. As the fire crackled higher, casting golden hues against the cold stone, Thorn pulled her close, his embrace a fortress of warmth that thawed the eternal frost in her core. Their lips met in a kiss forged of blood and mercy, slow and profound, tasting of pine smoke and the faint copper of shared trials. In that union, her gift surged one final time, illuminating the blood-drop pommel's true symbolism. Not lost, but waiting in the castle's chamber, a talisman to be reclaimed at dawn, sealing their bond with the remnant of her human essence. Sacrifice had come, her ties to the court severed, her past's ghosts confronted, and in its wake, healing flowed like molten silver through their veins. The wind outside softened to a hush, Uve distant and harmonious, as if the wilds themselves approved this renascimento. Two exiles reborn, love the proof that mended what rejection had torn. But as they parted, foreheads touching in the fire's glow, Alara glimpsed the horizon through the cave's veil. A faint crimson streak on the snow, the court's distant banners rallying for one last gambit. The war was not ended, only transformed. Her choice had crowned mercy, yet freedom's price was vigilance eternal. Thorn's hand clasped hers, scarred fingers intertwining with her claw-tipped ones, his melancholy smile a vow amid the ethical dawn. "What is strength?" he whispered, echoing the philosophy that had bound them, if not choosing this us over the shadows that seek to consume? The flames danced higher, shadows yielding to light, and in that fragile union, Alara felt the moon's blessings settle like fresh snow. Destiny embraced, not as cage, but as the path to true liberty. Their hearts, stilled and beating, aligned in rhythm, a testament to redemption's quiet fire, burning eternal against the northern night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.